Chapter 11, Sticky Notes, Biodiversity and Conservation Biology. We're going to start our sticky notes on the next page, which is page 276. So on this page, you need to know the definitions of the following: biodiversity, species, species diversity, and species richness. They all are similar with definitions, but they are slightly different. So biodiversity is the varieties of life, and that includes things like ecosystems, species, and genetic diversity. And then you also know that species diversity is just the number of different species in an area. Part of species diversity is species richness, which is the number of different species. And so they are pretty similar. So basically on the AP test, if you see biodiversity, it goes kind of along with these as well. Okay, so up here we have some terms. So ecosystem diversity is types of ecosystems in an area. So this particular picture has a river, riparian, it means river, ecosystem, and then it has some wooded areas, and then it has some mountain ecosystems too. In Southern California, we have a huge amount of biodiversity. We are a biodiversity hotspot because we have so many different ecosystems in Southern California. We have the beach, we have chaparral, we have oak woodlands, and we have mountain ecosystems. And so that creates a lot of biodiversity. So then we have, add up here on your sticky note, habitat diversity is very similar to ecosystem diversity. And so the AP test will probably use the word habitat diversity more than ecosystem diversity. And then species diversity and genetic diversity. So genetic diversity is important because it allows a population to withstand environmental change. So if something happens, a disease comes through the frogs, for example, if you've got a lot of different genetics, one or two or three or whatever, a few of them will survive because they are resistant genetically to that disease and then pass on that resistance. It's happened to humans too. When the Black Plague came through in the Middle Ages, came through several times through Europe, not everybody died. Some people were resistant, so their whole families died, but they did not because they had a specific gene that produced some proteins that protected them. Going on to the next page. And the next page. So on page 280, we have this figure and caption here about longitudinal gradient. So as you're studying, make sure that you read the caption because it explains it. So basically, when you go up like this on a globe, these are lines of latitude. So in California, right here, we are about 34 degrees north latitude. You can see that 30 and 40. So right about here is us in Santa Clarita. We're at about 34 degrees north latitude. The equator is 0 latitude. So the most species richness is near the equator because it's hot and damp. So rainforests and other equatorial regions have the most species. And then as you go north and then south, it's the same. You get less and less and less species, except for a few hotspots. Like over here, we're a diversity hotspot, but overall, you get less and less and less as you go up in latitude, and that's the latitudinal gradient. On page 281, there's some terms to know here. Know what extinction means. Extirpation is gone from a certain area. So for example, the grizzly bear is not extinct, but it is from California. which is ironic because it's on our state flag. So there used to be grizzlies all over California, including Santa Clarita. So we say the grizzly bear is extirpated from California. Extinctions are normal. They're not just all humans causing extinctions. We have what's called a background rate of extinction. So we know that normally species go extinct. This is just what they do. We have a fossil record. We also know that we've had mass extinctions too. We've had 5 previous mass extinctions. Most students are familiar with the dinosaurs, which is actually this one. So these are 440 million years ago. The dinosaur one was here, the Cretaceous Tertiary, which was 65 million years ago. We are currently in a 6th mass extinction, and this one happens to be human-caused, primarily from loss of habitat. Turning to page 283, the only thing to know on this page is the IUCN red list, and so that's up here. It is an updated list of species facing high risks of extinction. Turning to 284, so we have a lot on this page. So the main factors leading to a decrease in biodiversity, we can learn it from an acronym. So HIPCO, so think of hippo except with a C. The first one's habitat loss. So this is a good way to remember this. This will be on the AP test. They will expect you to remember HIPCO. And we have habitat loss, invasive species, population growth, that's human population growth, pollution, climate change. Overexploitation means overhunting, overgathering, overfishing, overharvesting. So gathering would be like plants or mussels, or harvesting would be like mussels or clams. So that's all goes with overexploitation. You need to know that habitat loss is #1 cause of species declining and becoming extinct. People think it's hunting to extinction, but that is not the case. It's habitat loss. Whenever you have habitat loss, first the specialists go away first, and then the generalists go. The species needing large areas to hunt decline, which are often your top predators need a large hunting space because of trophic level loss of energy. And a lot of the loss of top predators are also keystone species. The impacts of habitat loss vary from species to species. Some can handle it and some cannot. Some just move into neighborhoods. So for example, if we have habitat loss to build homes, some can live around homes, like coyotes will live around homes. Raccoons will live in neighborhoods, no problem. But others will not. I mean, coyotes don't live in our neighborhoods, they'll walk through them. But mountain lions disappear, bears disappear. Sometimes they get in neighborhoods, but it's really, really uncommon, and so their numbers will go down. This figure and caption shows habitat fragmentation. So we don't always just completely remove a habitat. Sometimes it fragments into different components. And we leave a little patch here and a little patch there, and we think, oh, that's great, we left wild area. But it actually lowers the overall quantity of species. This figure and caption shows poaching of elephant tusks, which is a huge, huge problem. So elephant tusks are is ivory, and ivory is banned from sale in many countries, including ours, because it's decimating the elephant population. Unfortunately, a lot of terrorist groups, they go in and illegally hunt elephants, sell it on the black market, and then use that money to buy weapons for wars or terrorist activity. All right, page 287. Now we can talk about invasive species. So this is the second one in HIPCO, invasive species. So what's the definition? We learned it in a previous chapter, so it should be a little bit of a review. An invasive species is new to a habitat. Now, it can be accidental, like zebra mussels were accidentally brought to the United States, but sometimes it's on purpose. Sometimes people bring in an animal thinking that it's going to be great to have as meat, and then it gets wild, or they bring it in as biological control. Cane toads in Australia are an example. They didn't eat the beetles they thought they were going to eat, and then they became an invasive species. Sometimes fishermen will add a new type of fish to a lake because they want to fish for it and they want it to reproduce. And so in some of California's lakes, we have invasive fish that have been released there illegally by fishermen. Now, sometimes an invasive species can be beneficial, like the European honeybee pollinates our crops. They're extremely important to us. Or earthworms were brought over with the colonists way back in the day. But most of the time, they're not beneficial. They can threaten native species. Another characteristic is that they are often generalists and are selected, which means that they can eat things and live in a variety of habitats. Are selected means they make a lot of babies and they have a lot of offspring. They outcompete native species. Island species are more vulnerable to invasive species. Hawaii has a huge problem with invasive species. If you look down here in this paragraph, it says species native to islands are especially vulnerable to disruption from introduced species. Island species have existed in isolation for millennia with very few parasites, predators, and competitors. As a result, they've not evolved the defenses necessary to resist invaders. So this is a really important test question too. Why island species are more vulnerable. On page 288, we need to know several ways to control or prevent invasive species. So we studied this one earlier with like zebra mussels, so we can inspect our boats. But what if you're hiking somewhere? Well, don't bring seeds or leaves or plants or bugs that hitched onto your boots. Inspect them before you go into a new ecosystem. Don't move firewood from one place to another. So if you are camping, you are not supposed to bring the firewood from home to your campsite unless it's the same ecosystem, but most people travel a little bit before they go camping. You need to buy the firewood there that's the same tree species as where you are. Don't move fruits and veggies to new locations because sometimes eggs or larvae or little fruit flies can move from one place to another. In California, we have a big problem with Mediterranean fruit flies, and so they have inspections to protect that industry, a fruit industry. Don't release pets. So if you get tired of a turtle or a snake, you need to surrender it to animal control, and sometimes it can be adopted out. But don't release it. We have a huge problem even in Santa Clarita with people releasing their pet turtles. They got tired of them. Red sliders. They have a red stripe down their faces, and people don't want to kill them and they don't want to take care of them anymore, so they release them into the wild like at Bridgeport Lake. And the problem is that they outcompete native species and they become invasive. Plant your yards carefully. What that means is at the garden store, plant native plants or ones that won't become invasive. And you can ask at the gardening department about that. So once we have an invasive species, what can we do? We can remove it mechanically, like with machines, or hand removal of invasive species. We can bring in some biological controls. In a previous chapter, you learned about the prickly pear cactus was controlled by that moth they brought in. We can also use chemicals, poisons, or pesticides for plants.